Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Landscape Design webinar. My name is Nick, and I'll be doing the presentation with you today. Just like all of our previous webinars, everybody will be on mute, but if you do happen to have any questions at any point during our class, please feel free to go ahead and type that into the questions and answers section. And at the end of the class, I will go through and answer any questions that may have come up. Also, at the end of the class, I will be sending out an email that will contain a document that covers everything that we're going to be talking about in today's class. Should you happen to have any questions while going over that document, you can reach out to our support department. You can reach them by either phone or email, and they will be happy to help you out. So again, today's class is on landscape design. And we're going to be going over a couple of different topics in today's class. We're going to be going through and we're going to be looking at the many different tools that Envisioneer offers for your landscape and your design needs. We're also going to be looking at the terrain settings. We're going to be looking at adding in your different terrain options. And then we're going to be taking just a brief look at plants in Envisioneer. So first, let's talk about our terrain settings. So when laying out the topography of a site, determining the settings in the drawing environment is the most important start point. We're going to go up and we're going to select under settings. We're going to select the document settings, and then we're going to select the terrain option in our menu. This is going to bring up the terrain page where we can see all the different terrain options. And I'm just going to try and get rid of this dialogue here. There it goes. So now what we're going to see is under the terrain, we're going to see a couple of different options that are going to help us with the visibility and the presentation of our terrain. So first thing we're going to see is under terrain, we're going to see this auto cut terrain around building. And this is allowing you to select the location that you want the terrain to cut around. So if you are building a design that has a full basement, you're going to want to make sure that you adjust this setting to be to your foundation. That way, when you draw in your foundation walls, it will cut the terrain away from the foundation wall area and remove the actual grass from inside your design. If you are creating a pier type situation where you're not going to want to be cutting the terrain, then you're going to want to come in here and you're going to want to make sure you uncheck this option. And this way the terrain will actually flow right through your design and it won't cut around any of the locations in your building locations dialog. So again, use this option to again select the location that you want to be cutting around in your actual designs. Under that, we have our terrain mesh. Now, the terrain grade level is default set to 0. When you add in your terrain to your site, such as your hills and your slopes, they will be added on top of the terrain level of 0. Our building locations are also determined by indicating their height above this grade line, which is again set to 0 inches or 0 millimeters, depending on what you're using. Underneath that, we have our length and our width. Now, this also corresponds with the size of our grid that we have on our screen, but by default, it is set to 160 feet by 160 feet. This is just the default size that we make the actual terrain when we're looking at it in our plan view. So if I just cancel out of here and I zoom out, that's what this is showing up right here. That green line, that is 160 feet by 160 feet. I'm just going to go back to settings and document settings and terrain. So we're going to see that value here. Now, the mesh spacing is just the actual spacing of the mesh in the terrain itself. And by default, it is set to the 4-foot mark. If you adjust the value of the length or the width, it will automatically try to accommodate that, and it will adjust the mesh spacing. You will want to make sure that it is a round number. So if you do adjust it, make sure it's set in either a 2-foot or a 4-foot increment. So again, it just helps keep your dimensions true. Now, the mesh spacing actually creates the site surface itself. So the tighter the spacing, the greater the accuracy will be. However, the tighter the spacing, the more geometry you are going to add to your model. And this will actually slow down your work in some cases, depending on how large you've made the terrain. Typically, your eye won't be able to tell the difference if the terrain is set to anything below the 4-foot interval anyway. So that's why we keep it at that 4-foot mark. But again, you can adjust that as needed for your design. The show boundary option is the actual green line that you see in your plan view. So if I uncheck that and I say apply and then okay, it will actually just remove the green boundary line from the display. The terrain will still be there in 3D, so you will still be able to see the terrain itself. You're just removing that green line from the display. And I'm going to turn mine back on there. Underneath that, we have our contours. So you can show the contours as they are needed in your design. So if you start to add in hills and valleys or berms and trenches or anything that's going to change the topography of the site, this option with it being checked will show the contours where they fall. The start point is going to be where you want it to start. So we're going to start at 0 inches, and then the interval will be whatever interval you enter in here. So do you want to show a contour every 1 foot, every 2 foot, every 5 foot? You can decide what you want your intervals to be, and it will add in a contour line at those intervals, and it will also show you the measurement in that contour. So we're going to leave ours set to 0 inches, and we're also going to leave the interval set to 2. Beside that, we have our material. And this is what you want the terrain to look like in a 3D view. By default, we use grass 1. You can use the select option and you can change that to be whatever material that you want. And you can see here it automatically grabs grass 1. But there are a couple of other different grass options. Or maybe you're designing something on a beach, so maybe you want to show sand instead of grass. So you can adjust, again, what the material is going to be for your terrain in your designs. Just going to click cancel on there because I don't want to change that to be sand. And then underneath all of that is the actual layer that we're going to see. So again, in our 2D plan view, we're going to see that terrain line because we have it set to show the boundary. And this is what the color is of that line. By default, we have it set to green. And you can, again, adjust it. You can make this whatever color that you want. You can change it to be a different layer altogether, or you can just adjust the actual color and line types and line weights. I'm not going to make any changes here, so I'm just going to click cancel because I don't, oh, sorry, I do want to make that change because I did change the site boundaries. So we're going to say apply and then okay. So that'll bring that line back on for us. So just a quick tip here. We're going to go up and we're going to click on the drawing aid. So we're going to go back up to settings and we're going to go to document settings and we're going to go to drawing aids. Now in the drawing aids, here's where I was mentioning the actual grid. So by default, we match the grid with the terrain size in all of our templates. You can follow that same structure if you would like, or you can turn off the grid completely, or you can set your own grid and your own terrain size to be whatever you would like. But underneath the drawing aids, this is where you can control the actual size of the grid and the actual spacing that you would see. We're then just going to say, we're going to go through each of the options underneath our terrain tab so we can see how they actually work in the Envisioneer program. So we're going to go and we're going to select the terrain tab. If you like to use the buttons, select the terrain tab. If you like to use the menu, if you go up to insert, you will find the terrain options and you will find all of the commands underneath the terrain menu. So again, if you like to use the buttons, just select terrain. If you like to use the menu, just go to insert terrain and you'll find all those options there. I'm going to use the terrain tab. I find it to be easier. Finding the buttons is just quicker for me. So I will use the buttons option. But again, if you want to find them, Under the menu, it's under Insert, Terrain, and you will find all the same buttons. So first, we're going to be taking a look at adding in hills and valleys. Now, to insert a hill or a valley, you can choose the Hills and Valleys button. And once you select that, it will bring up a command that will allow you to specify how high you want that hill to be. So you can adjust the value here by typing in a measurement that you want your hill to be in your design. Now, the zenith option that we see here is how steep that hill is going to be. So if we make it a 2-foot hill and we keep it in the middle, it's going to be kind of like a little mound in our ground. If I adjust the zenith, it's going to spread that 2-foot hill out over a larger area. So it's going to create more of a subtle slope than a quick drop, like if I slide the zenith over to the left. So play around with the value of where you would want to see that hill. And then once you place it in, I'll drop this one in so you can see it. And we'll just place this one in. So you can see here that we have a 2-foot hill and it's been added in. If I do that again, and I just make that a wider zenith, and I say, okay, you'll see that it just creates that as a little bit wider of a path for that hill itself. And if I bring my cursor over here, try and find that hill. It's kind of hard to see. There it is there. Let's turn on rendered outline so we can see it. So here you can see the first hill, and it kind of just juts up in the air. And then as you come over here, you can see it's more of a gradual slope as it slopes away from the center point of the terrain itself. And I'm just going to pan this around so you can now see that hill being added in. So again, just different ways of adding in those hills. Now, we call it a hill and a valley because there's also a way to go in a negative direction. So if I wanted to use that same tool here with a positive value, it will be a hill. If I go in the negative value, it would be a valley. So it's going to create a depression in the ground now. And I'm going to make this back into the middle here, and I'm going to say okay. And I'll click again in the middle. And so now what we're going to see in that same 3D view is instead of a hill, we're now going to see a hole in the ground. And that will create our valley. And you should be able to see that pretty clearly now on the screen. But if not, if you drop down, we'll now see that that terrain drops into the earth. And that will create your valley. Just going to delete that guy out. And the next thing we're going to be looking at is adding in berms and trenches. Now, the berms and trenches is another tool to allow you to create, again, a running hill or a berm or a trench that's going to be down into the earth. So again, you're going to select the option. You're going to give it your value. So you're going to say how high or how far below the grade do you want your hill, or sorry, your berm or your trench to be. Let's just adjust this to be 4 feet. And again, you can use your zenith slider to adjust the slope of the berm or the trench. So we're going to leave ours right in the middle, and we're going to say, okay. The difference with a berm compared to a hill is we're now selecting 2 points. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to select 2 points, and it's going to create a berm. So this can run across my screen. And again, if a 3D view, we'll be able to see that berm in our design. If I select that berm and I go into its properties, maybe now I want it to be a trench. So I'm going to go -4 feet. And what that will do is it will now create a -4 foot trench in our design. So again, very similar to the hills and valleys, except you're now selecting 2 points as to where you want that trench or that berm to run. So you just have a start point and an end point instead of one single click. Next, we have plateaus. So I'm going to go back into my 2D plan view. And again, just like our berms and trenches and just like our hills and valleys, when we select our plateau tool, it's going to give us an option to add in a height and adjust the zenith. Again, the difference with this option is I am now able to control or add in more points. So when I say OK to that, I can create a plateau and I can turn off ortho and I can add this in at any angle that I want. So I'm just going to turn ortho off by pressing F8. So now I can create a plateau and I can drop this in and create any shape that I want for this plateau. And then when I say finish, it will create that plateau. And again, with the zenith set in the middle, it's going to create a subtle slope. So when we go back into our 3D view, and I just pull this camera back, we will see that plateau. So it's going to create a flat surface on the top, and then our slopes down from that flat surface. And again, if you wanted to, you could use this plateau in a negative value. So if I went back in and I said -4 feet, we are now creating a depression, which I could use as a pond if I wanted to. And I could add in some fake water in here, or I can add in a surface to show the water. So it's creating like a pond in my design. So you can use those berms and trenches, slopes and hills and valleys, berms and trenches and plateaus to create any kind of adjustments to the terrain above or below the surface itself. The next tool I want to talk about is the slopes tool. So I'm going to delete this out and we're going to select the slope option. Now the slope option is a little bit different than the tools we were just using. The slope tool will allow you to indicate where a slope starts and ends, and then the terrain will adjust accordingly. Again, you can control the properties based on a height option or on an angle. So if you don't know the actual height, but you know the angle of that slope, you can use the angle option instead. Typically, you would probably want to use the height value, but again, the option is there for you. I'm going to make mine 8 feet. And we're going to say, okay, so this is creating a slope of 8 feet. Now, wherever I start my arrow, so if I start my arrow here, right in the middle of my design, and I move it in this direction, it is going to slope that terrain up from that point. So my 0 point is the start point. So wherever I started is at 0, and then the end of the arrow is the upper point. So it's going to be 0 up to 8 feet. If I go back into the properties of that, and let's say I wanted to adjust this so that it sloped down, I would add in a negative value. And I would say, okay, and it would now slope that down from 0 to -8 feet. And this is how you can create your walkout basement designs, by just simply sloping the terrain. You can slope the terrain and adjust the actual direction of the slope to create your different shapes. You can also add in additional slopes. So if you wanted to go in a different direction, we're just going to go a -8 feet. You can also add in slopes that run in different directions and they kind of converge to, again, create the different looks for the sloping of your sites. And again, you can move that arrow around. You can make it a little bit bigger. You can slope it in a different direction. And again, you will get just the different looks to how that site is going to be sloped. So you get something that looks like that. It's kind of hard to see on my screen. I'm going to try and move my mouse down here so you can see it a little bit better on an angle. But that's how you can adjust the actual sloping of your terrain in your designs. I'm just going to delete those guys out. The next thing we're going to see is our paths. Now, paths, when you use them, will follow the slope of the terrain. So right now I have a flat terrain. So if I add in a paved driveway, it's just going to be a flat paved driveway. So we're going to see that driveway, and I'm just going to pan down and walk up to that driveway. So we'll just see that driveway sitting on top of the terrain, and it will follow the slope of the terrain. And it does that by this hug terrain option. So with the hug terrain selected, if I slope this terrain down, so let's just do another slope here, and we'll go down. Now let's just go down 3 feet. And we'll say I'm going to start from here. And we're just going to go down like this. What it will do is it will take that path or that driveway and it will follow the slope as it moves. If you unselect this option, it will create a flat surface and it will try to fill in the void for you automatically. So you can again adjust this, use this tool to create any kind of pathway, driveway, sidewalk that you want in your design. Alternatively, you could also use the surface tool or the floor tool to add in any of these pathways as well. So you can use that option to again create different shapes or different designs for your terrain. The next tool is the pads tool. And again, kind of similar to our pathways and our sidewalks, where you can create the actual pad and you can have your different values of how thick you want those pads to be. They range from 2 feet up to 8 feet, or sorry, 2 inches up to 8 inches. And we have them both concrete and in masonry form. Again, you just simply select the pad, place it where you want. And I'm just going to draw in a pad real quick here. And when you go into a 3D view, again, it's going to have the hug terrain option. So it's going to try and hug the terrain, follow the terrain as much as possible. Or you can simply say no, and it will create a flat surface, and it will again fill in the void. Again, you can use the pad tool to do this, or you can use the floors or surfaces tool to add in your own surface. The advantage of doing a surface like a floor or adding in a surface itself is you can create an actual thick floor and it will be a true thickness. So here it's trying to fill in that void for us. If you want that to be actually 4 inches thick but be flat, then you would use a floor. And you can use the floor by picking points. And you would just grab your 4-inch concrete slab and you would just say, I want that same floor to be right here, but I want it to be perfectly flat. And I want it to be true at 4 inches all the way through. The rest of this would be filled in with gravel or whatever I need. So I just want the actual true calculation of what a 4-inch thick slab would be. So that would be the more accurate way for estimates. If it's just to be something that's going to be shown as a rendering or a 3D view to show a client, then the pad option will work just as well. So now we've added in, and I'm just going to go back to our terrain tab. So now we've added in all of our slope tools. We've added in our driveways and our pads. We can also add in retaining walls. So I'm just going to delete that out. And if you wanted to add in retaining walls will just allow you to create a space to hold back the actual terrain if you wanted to show in certain areas. So if I wanted to show a retaining wall, I could add in a retaining wall along an area, and it will show that retaining wall in our design. I can elevate this up or down. I can adjust the value of it so it sits a little bit higher or it sits a little bit lower. And then I can adjust the actual terrain to show where I want it to actually slope to and from. So in this case, what I would do here is I can take this option and we're just going to mirror this guy around from the center point like so, and no, and we're going to just do something like that. And with my terrain, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get rid of the terrain for just a second. And I'm going to go back up and underneath my walls option, underneath my, it's under floors. We're going to do a room division. We're going to be able to add in a room division line. So what this will do is it's going to cut the terrain out from that area. So let's say I want my terrain to slope. So I'm going to elevate these guys down. We're going to go down, elevate. Let's go -3 feet. We'll say okay. we're gonna get something that looks like this. But I want this terrain to slope from here down, and I want this to be earth in here or grass in here. So what I would do is I would go back into my 2D plan view. I would go into my terrain, slope. I'll go down -3 feet, and I'm going to slope it from here down to here, which is going to be the edge of my terrain. And what that will do is it will slope that down. I am going to adjust the size of these. So I'm going to go into the properties. And we're just going to make this guy 4 feet tall. And we'll say, okay, and we'll elevate it down -4 feet. And we'll get something like that. And then let's just adjust our slope to be a -2 foot 6 inches, just to give us something that looks like that. So now we have our sloping terrain, and I'm now going to have to fill this area in to show where I want that to be. This can be grass, it can be earth, it can be concrete, it can be whatever you want, but you will need to add that back in. So to do that, you again can use underneath the building tab, you can use a floor, you can use a surface. We're going to need to fill that back in. I'm just going to grab a surface, and I'm just going to grab a ceramic tile floor surface. I'm just going to go like this, and we're just going to kind of trace this out and get this in something like that. It's going to be flat, so I'm going to make sure that it stays flat. And then what we're going to see is that option. So I'm going to see that new surface, and then I'm just going to elevate this down. And so underneath our surface commands, we're just going to go down a -1 foot 2.5 inches is what I do believe our building locations are at. 5.5 inches, sorry. So we're going to go into here, surface commands, define surface, lock that in, and that's going to be negative like that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply the same material. So if I want it to be grass, I will just select the grass and it should find it. If not, I will just go into here. That's not finding it. So let's go down to landscape materials, grass 1, and I will just apply that grass to there. And we now have our grass area in our retaining wall area. So that's one way of creating a retaining wall to show a raised area in a sloped part of our design. We go back to terrain. We then have the ability to add in our site boundary information. So if you want to show where the site boundaries are in your design, you can simply select this site boundary, and it will allow you to pick the points of where you want this site boundary to be. So if this is the actual property lines, you can go in and adjust the actual property lines. You can adjust the northing and easting measurements as well. So you can change the bearing from northeast to northwest to southeast to southwest. You can also adjust when editing which point gets edited. So if you want to keep peg 1 as the start point, then obviously peg 2 would need to be the one that moves. So you would allow that to happen. And then you can adjust the length. You can adjust the actual angle. So you can have your length, degrees and minutes to again show, your minutes and seconds to show exactly what the angles are. And then you can also show your setbacks. So whatever edge is selected, you can say from the front edge of my property, I need at least, let's just say 20 feet. So that's going to change that to be a 20-foot setback. When I select this edge, I can go into its properties and I can say from each edge, I only need to have an 8-foot setback. So from that edge, it's going to be 8 foot. From this edge, it's going to be 8 foot as well. And say OK. And then from the back, we know that for any structure, we need to have the same values. So we're going to have to, or a setback, so we're going to change that to be, let's just say 10 feet. And we'll say OK. So now we have our property lines, and then we have our setback lines all being displayed in our plan view. You can add dimensions to this. You can change the actual properties of it. So if you go back in, you can see there is a settings option. And underneath the settings, you can see how the bearing formats will be displayed. So is it a reference angle or an angle bearing? Do you want it to be in imperial or metric? Do you want the units to be in degrees, minutes, and seconds? What's the precision that you want to use? If you are changing it to be degree decimal, you can adjust the precision. Again, in the units, be it metric or imperial, do you want that to be in feet and inches or inches? Again, adjusting the precision. The lines themselves, you can adjust so that they use the actual layers. So you have property lines and boundary lines and setback lines and pegs. You can again adjust these so that they show up in the color that you want. How do you want the pegs to be displayed? So this is all going to give you the ability to adjust how these are going to be displayed in your view. I'm just going to say okay to that, and then okay to that. And again, you can see how that all takes shape. Now, for anyone using Building Essentials and Construction Suite, you're going to see two separate options. One is an import site data, and one is a spot point option. So I'm going to delete everything out of here. I'm just going to select everything, and I'm going to hit delete. If you are using, again, Building Essentials or Construction Suite, and you actually have a surveyor that gives you the ability to import site data because they're sending you information, you can use those files to import it right into Envisioneer. So I'm going to select the import site data. I actually have a surveyor. He's sending me documents. I'm going to import that in, and it's going to show me the actual terrain that they've surveyed. When you select this option, you're going to see the current terrain will be converted to a triangulated irregular network, or what we call a tin mesh. Once you do this and you convert it to a mesh, you will no longer be able to use the standard terrain tools like the slopes and valleys, berms and trenches, berms and plateaus like we were looking at earlier. All of those will no longer work. So we're going to say, okay, we know that. We're going to say, okay. And then it's going to ask you to select the file. So you have this obviously saved to a location on your computer. I'm just going to go to my desktop. I have a file saved on my desktop. Now, down here in the lower left corner, I have a a file format. When I click on that, there are a bunch of different formats that we allow for the import of a terrain. You can do a text file, so a TXT file, a CSV file format, a GPX, a DWG, a DXF. In the AutoCAD, DXF, and DWG file format, it has to be a point file. It can't be like surfaces or anything like that. It actually has to have the actual points. And then there is the coordinates XYZ or YXZ. We then have the space delimited format. We have a point file, an Autodesk uploadable file, and then a northern, easting, and elevations option. So whatever format that your surveyor can provide, you're going to want to make sure that it's one of these formats so you can bring it into Envisioneer. I'm going to be using the coordinates X, Y, and Z, and then I'm just going to select the file, and I'm going to say open. It's now going to go through and it's going to show me all of the preview of all the different points for that. And I can see right off the bat that this is not in the correct format. So it is XYZ, but I don't want it to be comma delimited. I want to make sure that all of my points are in the correct column. So I should be seeing points in the X, in the Y, and the Z. If you don't know what it is, you can simply just click through and it should update for you. And then as soon as you find the one that moves everything in the correct format, that is the actual delimiter. And again, as you can see, as I go through all of these, none of them work or show me the correct way until I get the space. You can also start the import at a set row. So if you know that one of the points is not correct, or if you want to be starting from a different spot, you can change that value. Typically, you're probably going to want to start from the very beginning. So we're going to leave that set to 1, and we're going to say next. Now it's going to ask you, what was the units that were going to be used for this file? So you can change it from meters to feet. You can, again, adjust how you want this to look. I'm going to leave mine at, let's go down to, let's see what feet does. I'm not remembering exactly what it was before. So let's see what this does. And we're going to say next. So as we can see, when it's set to feet, we're looking at a site that is 972 feet. It's pretty big, but I believe that is the actual size of this. So feet was okay. In this dialog, you can again adjust certain values. These values here you can't edit. You won't be able to adjust these. They're locked in. You can only adjust these values here. So the grade level, I want that to be 0. And what that will do is it's just going to drop that down so it meets at 0 and it's going to go up from there. The angle, if you want to rotate this around, you can adjust the actual rotation so that it goes from this direction, and you want that new angle to be 0. So it's just going to rotate this around so it's now nice and flat or rotated in your design. Again, all I did there was I hit the rotate and I selected the 2 points. I got close. I'm not going to get too accurate with this, but you can zoom in and you can pick the actual points, and then you're just going to specify your new angle. You can also crop out a section. So if you did the crop box, you can crop out a section of where you want to be showing that actual terrain. And you can also set an insertion point. You can also move the origin if you want to. I'm just going to leave mine as it is, and I'm just going to say finish. And then what that's going to do is it's going to adjust that terrain, and I can just simply left click to place that terrain in. When I look at this in a 3D view, it may not look like anything, but if you remember, this is a 900-foot size terrain. So I actually need to zoom out quite a bit. And once I zoom it out, I'll be able to start to see that terrain. And if I move my cursor up, we'll start to see the terrain and how it looks. Now, this is being inserted as a coarse terrain. Now, what I mean by that is it's showing me this terrain, and the actual preview of it is set to a coarse option by default. The finer you make that terrain, or the smoother you make it look, the more geometry you're adding, but the more realistic it's going to look. So there is that fine line of where you want to show the actual terrain coarseness between a medium and a high, or a medium and a low. You will have to play around with it to see what looks best for you. But to do that, you're going to go back up to settings, document settings, and under terrain, you're going to notice that the dialog has changed a little bit. So now we have our tin smoothing option. We've converted it to a tin. So now I can see it's set to coarse or to fine, and I can adjust this slider, say apply, and then okay, and it will start to smooth out that terrain. And instead of seeing these big triangles, it's going to smooth it out, and I'm going to see smaller triangles, and it's going to create a more smooth terrain for me. But again, that's going to come at the cost of graphics, because again, you're adding more geometry to the file itself. So again, play around with that, see what's going to work best for you in your design. And again, you can go all the way up to the finest option and apply that and say, okay. And again, it's just going to take a second because it's got to auto save. And then once it's done, you will see the actual triangles get even smaller, and it will smooth out the terrain even more. So you can play around with those again as you work with it to see what is again going to work best for you when working with the actual terrain. Just going to go back into 2D. And if you want to revert your terrain back to the original, this is the only tool that isn't underneath the terrain tab. So there is no reset option here. To reset the terrain back to default, you're going to need to go back into Insert, Terrain, and you're going to need to select the Reset Terrain. And what this will do is it will revert it back to the default terrain, which will allow you to add in your hills and valleys and slopes and plateaus and all of that fun stuff with the terrain editing tools. But I'm resetting the terrain because I want to show you the last option here, which is your spot points. This is the option that I use most often So if I don't get site information from my surveyor, but I want to show the topography of the site, I'm going to use the actual spot points. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to add in actual points, and I can add in a value at each point. So again, this is only going to be available in the Building Essentials or the Construction Suite package. So let's say I have a design drawn out. So I'm just going to draw in a basic building here. I'm just going to go in and, sorry, let's turn on ortho. So I'm going to turn ortho back on. And we're just going to drop in some walls here. So let's say that this is my design. And I know that at the front of my house, I'm going to say okay to that. So again, it's going to let me know that I'm converting this to a 10. I'm going to say okay. So I know that at the front corner of my house, that's 0. So this is 0 and this is 0. But as I get towards the back of the house, it starts to slope down. So I'm just going to continue to add in points on each corner of my design. So we're just going to go in like this, and we're going to drop in some points. I think I missed a point here. I did. So I'm just going to bring this guy back out to this corner here, just so it's easily selectable. I want to have a piece of it sticking out from the corner. So again, from here and here, I know it's at 0. But let's say by the time I get to the back corner, I know it's going to be dropping down 2 feet. So I'm going to make this, instead of 0, I'm going to go minus 2 feet. I'm going to say okay. And then over here, we're going to go again, minus 2 feet. I know at that back corner, it's dropping down 2 feet. In here, we're going to say, we're going to make this minus 1 foot. We're just going to make it a nice, gentle slope from the front to the back, and we're just going to make that minus 1 foot. So that gives me my points from my actual design standpoint. Now, at the corners, these are also going to be at 0. So if I know that at the back of my property, a minus 2 at the house, maybe I want this to be minus 6 feet. It's going to start to slope away from my house quite subtly, but at the very end, it's going to be minus 6. I can add in additional points. So I can drop in points wherever I want, and then I can adjust those as well. So this will be minus 2 feet out here. And we'll again do another minus 2 feet here. And you can add in as many points as you want. And all this will do is it's again going to, and I'm just going to reset this camera, it's going to subtly slope the terrain for you from the start all the way back. Again, I've converted this to be a tin. So if I want this to be a bit smoother of a terrain, I would just go to settings, document settings, and then under terrain, I would just adjust this to be a less coarse terrain, and it'll start to slope that terrain. You'll see it gets rid of the actual angular look to the actual terrain, and it's a little bit more of a subtle slope. And we'll just do a rendered outline so you can see that. So right now I don't have a foundation in here, so that's why we're seeing through there. And we remember underneath my settings and document settings, my terrain is cutting around the ground floor. So I want that to cut around the foundation. Say apply and okay. And what you're going to see now is the terrain is going to go all the way through my design because I don't have a foundation drawn in yet. So we're going to see the terrain show up underneath. If I go back into 2D, and let's just add in a foundation real quick. So under my building, I'm just going to go to Floor and Foundation Builder Wizard, and I'm just going to add in a foundation real quick. What this will do is, as soon as I add the foundation in, it will cut the terrain away. And we're just going to go in and say next. We want this to be a foundation. I'm just going to do a full basement. We're going to use concrete. I'll just do an 8-inch poured concrete wall. I will do a 4-inch thick concrete floor. And I'm just going to do a 1 foot by 1 foot 8 footing. Say next and finish. And so now what's going to happen is we're going to see the foundation wall. We're going to see the terrain up against that foundation wall. And when I come into my actual basement, we will see that it's cut the terrain away from the foundation. So that is a different way of adding in your sloping site by using your spot points. The last thing I want to talk about is plants in Envisioneer. So in version 16, we added in the ability to add in 3D plants. So when you go to your landscape option now, instead of going to terrain, you can select landscape. And when you select the trees option, you're going to see all of these different trees. These are all full 3D models, and it's just going to help with your actual rendering. And you can go through and add in different plants to see how they're going to look, and they will follow the terrain. So if you've sloped the terrain, the plants will follow the slope of the terrain. So they will move automatically, and you will see them in the actual, sitting on top of the actual terrain itself. You can adjust them. So if you want to elevate them up or down, you can actually move them around if you need to show it's sitting higher or lower on the terrain itself. You can also adjust the property. So if you find that the trees are a bit too big, you can just simply go in and say, I typically keep uniform scale on, and I say, well, I want this tree to be 50 feet high. And what it will do is it will adjust everything uniformly, so it just looks a little bit clearer. And again, you can make them even bigger. So I can say, I want this one to be 30 feet. So it will adjust the trees automatically, and it will keep them all nice and proportional. So this one, again, I'm just going to make this guy 60 feet just to, again, adjust its size. I am in a rendered outline view right now, so you're going to see all of the different looks to the trees. You're going to see the leaves. But if you were to render this, if I just went into a 3D real view real quick here, you'll be able to see that it's now showing all the different leaves. And then when I start the render, the leaves will look fuller when you actually render it. So don't get discouraged when you look at it in a 3D model view and it looks like the leaves are missing from the tree. Once you actually render it, you'll see all of the leaves and they will look fuller when you create your actual renderings. So those are the 3D trees in the program. There are coniferous trees, there's deciduous trees, there's house plants, there's shrubbery, flowers, ground cover. You can go through the list and add in all of your different plants. And again, these are going to be full 3D actual models. So when they cast shadows, you will see the leaves on the ground. You'll see the branches. All of that will be taken into effect when you actually create your renderings. So it's another great way to show your landscape designs by adding in these 3D trees. I'm not going to let this go through and render completely, so I'm just going to click cancel on that, and we're just going to click close on there. The last thing I wanted to show is, so we've shown our plants. If we wanted to show an actual pathway, so let's go back into our terrain and let's just add in a path real quick. Let's just do a sidewalk. We'll do a concrete path up to our front of our house. So let's say we want to show our pathway up, and we're going to see our path in our design. So we're going to see that going up to our front door. But let's say on either side, I wanted to add in like a flower garden, and I wanted it to be mulch, or I want it to be soil. You can add in underneath the landscape option, we have what we call fills. And under the fills, you can use, again, asphalt, we have beach sand, we have dirt. We also have all of these other different options. So if I want it to be like topsoil or wood chip mulch, I can pick points on where I want this to sit. And what it will allow me to do is it will allow me to place in exactly where I want this to be. And then what I can do from there is I can actually manipulate the size of it. I can adjust and curve the edges if I want it to be more of a whimsical look to the actual mulch. I can curve all of that out. And when I look at that in a 3D view, what I'm going to see is that new mulch material. And in here, I would just go into the actual properties. And again, you can see I can adjust the appearance of it. So if I change my mind, maybe I don't want it to be the mulch option, I can change it out. Or I can simply replace it with, let's say, sand. And what it will do is it will just change the material to be whatever I want. It will keep the same shape. It just changes the actual material. And I can do that on both sides to again just show a different fill option in my landscaped design. So that covers everything that I wanted to talk about in today's class. So I'm going to open up the questions and answers section. So again, if you do happen to have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about adding in terrain tools in Envisioneer. While I wait for any questions to come in, I'm just going to reiterate that I will be sending out an email. In that email, you will have the actual landscape design document, and it goes through everything that we've talked about in today's class. But should you happen to have any questions while going over that document, again, please don't hesitate. Reach out to our support department. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. One question is, can you import survey boundaries? What I would typically do there isn't an option to import a survey boundary, but what you can do is you can import a PDF and you can trace the PDF itself. So you can use the PDF as your trace object and then trace the actual boundary lines to show exactly where you want things to be. As long as it's a vector PDF, you'll be able to snap to the actual points. So it should give you the correct degrees, minutes, and seconds as you're tracing it. If not, you can adjust the properties or the settings to match what you want as you're entering it in. So is there an import option? No, but you can import a PDF and trace over top of it. So again, I'm just going to pause here for just a moment just to see if anybody has any other questions or if there's any follow-up questions. And again, like I mentioned, I will be sending that email out right at the end of our class. So once this is done, I'll send that out. And this video will also get uploaded to YouTube so you can watch this again at your own leisure. Perfect. Well, there doesn't appear to be any other questions. So I do want to thank everybody for attending today. I do look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.